Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and a happy new year to you all. Welcome to today's session. My name is Marie Eglantine Juru. I'm the project officer of higher education at the Association of African Universities based in Accra, Ghana, and I'll be moderating today's session. So welcome to this webinar. This webinar will be on the African Standard and Guidelines for Quality Assurance Users Guide. As you all know, the African Standard and Guidelines for Quality Assurance were developed some time back, and they aim to support higher education institutions and quality assurance agencies in developing adequate internal and external quality assurance systems practices that correspond to international good practice to support the standard. And then to support these standard and guidelines, a user's guide was developed, and this gives clarification and more guidance on the implementation of these standards and the guidelines. Our webinar will last for 1.5 hours. Simultaneous interpretation in English, French, and Portuguese is provided, so you are invited to choose your preferred language. So you can either choose English, French, or Portuguese. And speakers also are welcome to use any of those languages. So during the Q&A session, you'll be requested to use the chat or the Q&A function in the control bar. So ladies and gentlemen, let me take you through the agenda. As I said, our session will last 1.5 hours. So we start with the welcome remarks by the Asg-Qa implementation team, followed by the short introduction, background of the user's guide by Elizabeth Colucci, followed by the introduction to the user's guide by Florence Lenga, then the reflection on the use of the African Standard Guidelines by Quality Assurance Agencies by Amin Alal, then a presentation of Asg-Qa dissemination project, the use of the African Standard Quality Assurance Guidelines to strengthen quality assurance in higher education institutions by Beatrice Odela Quach, then followed by questions and discussion with the audience. Then we'll close our webinar with the conclusion, and that will be the end of our webinar. So I'm looking forward to our discussion today. So without further ado, I would like to request the representative of the Asg-Qa implementation team to give her welcome remarks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Juru. I'll perhaps take the reins for the next 2 agenda points, which is both the introduction on behalf of the team and also the very short background on the user's guide. Very happy to be here today. My name is Elizabeth Colucci. I come from the organization Obriel Global, which is an organization which is coordinating the Asg-Qa 2 initiative, the Asg-Qa 2 implementing team in cooperation with the Association of African Universities. The Secretary General of the AAU may be with us throughout the course of this webinar and say some words later. In addition, the German Academic Exchange Service and the European Association for Quality Assurance in Higher Education. Asg-Qa 2 is coming to an end this February. It has been a very fruitful 3 years. We've been challenged by the pandemic, as has the entire higher education sector. We've transformed an initiative which has focused in its inception almost solely on the topic of quality assurance and harmonization in the sector of quality assurance in higher education, to an initiative that has a much broader and deeper policy significance to the African higher education context. It has responded directly to the objectives of the African Union with regards to continental harmonization in the higher education sector. It has responded directly to the CESA strategy, the Continental Education Strategy for Africa, and it has provided a very important platform to unite governments, ministers, quality assurance agencies, higher education professionals at the level of higher education institutions, and other important stakeholder organizations across the continent in the pursuit of common objectives, which is the improvement, the greater pertinence, and the competitiveness of African higher education. Asg-Qa is in a phase of dissemination right now. We are very pleased to be able to share with you some of the very important products and outputs and results which this initiative in its second phase has generated. One of those products has been the African Standards and Guidelines for Quality Assurance in Africa. These are standards and guidelines that were actually developed in the first phase of Asg-Qa between 2015 and 2018 by a very dedicated African task force, which has also been inspired by and learned from some of the experiences in Europe in developing our own standards and guidelines. And this expertise has been provided through our partner Asg-Qa. But the African Standards and Guidelines have really developed their own personality and their own significance for the challenges that the African continent is facing in the quality assurance sector. It is a document that is available in 4 languages, in French, English, Portuguese, and Arabic. And under Asg-Qa 2, we have had the occasion to continue to promote that user's guide, to encourage its usage, both at the level of higher education institutions and at the level of quality assurance agencies. And it speaks to both levels of quality assurance and provides standards and guidelines for both levels of quality assurance. And in addition, we've had the privilege of constituting a new task force which has developed a user's guide for the African Standards and Guidelines. And the user's guide intends to provide examples, suggestions on how higher education institutions and quality assurance agencies might utilize the Asg-Qa in their own specific contexts, might find evidence for how they're compliant with it or not, etc. We will be hearing a lot about this user's guide throughout the course of this webinar today. This is an informative webinar. We want you to know about this tool. We want you to use this tool. And most importantly, we want to have a conversation about this tool, which is a multilingual conversation and which crosses the African continent. So I will stop there and I will give the floor back to our moderator and chair today. And just to say thank you to everyone for joining. And we are deeply honored to have been a part of this process. And we look forward to its continued benefits and to its continued impacts.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your introduction. With the agenda, we are going to proceed the introduction to the user guide by Professor Florence Lenga. Professor Florence Lenga is from Kenya. The floor is yours, Prof.
Thank you, Juru. And thank you for the invitation to present this to the participants today through this webinar. And yes, the user's guide for the African Standards and Guidelines for Quality Assurance in Higher Education were developed during Asg-Qa 2. And I want to go straight into the slide number 2 to be able to discuss the structure. Anna, yes, thank you. So the structure of the user's guide actually is basically in a similar manner to the African Standards and Guidelines for Quality Assurance in Higher Education. It comprises of 2 sections. The first section comprises of the Standards and Guidelines for Internal Quality Assurance, and we consider it as Part A of the Asg-Qa. Section 2 of the user's guide comprises of 2 parts. The first part is the Part B of the Asg-Qa, which actually are the Standards and Guidelines for External Quality Assurance. And the second part is on the Standards and Guidelines for external quality assurance agencies' internal quality assurance. The format of the guide is such that it is in a tabular form or tabular format for ease of reference to the various standards and guidelines. And so what we did is we developed different columns, about 4 columns. The first column basically is the standards, followed by their guidelines. The second column is actually the focus points, or what we are saying, guiding questions that can help somebody to gauge their quality. And then the last column actually is the examples of the best practices. Next slide, Anna. The 3 parts are interlinked, and it should be kept in mind when using the user's guide, because the standards really for Part A for higher education institutions should be mindful of the standards that are used by the quality assurance agencies when they are conducting their external quality reviews at institutions. And therefore, it is supposed to ensure that their internal quality assurance systems and processes are actually aligned with or satisfy the external quality assurance criteria and processes. The quality assurance agencies, on the other hand, should also give due recognition to the existence of the Asg-Qa standards in Part A used by the higher education institutions when they engage in self-assessments, to see to it that their internal quality assurance is appropriate for the external quality assurance activities that they are involved in. And of course, the last part, similarly then, which is actually the assurance of the external quality assurance agencies themselves, they should be able to appreciate that the higher education institutions should also be guaranteed that the external quality assurance agencies are also keeping pace in assuring their own quality assurance. Next slide. So now I have examples from the different sections of the African Standards and Guidelines. The first section, which is section 1, which is the Part A for higher education institutions, I will give the example of Standard 2. And the Standard 2 is on governance and management. The standard reads as follows, for those who have not been able to refer to it, and of course we don't have them with us now, but I've just given them in the slides. The institution shall have clearly stated governance and management structures. This will ensure sound and ethical governance and management, including robust QA practices that support the achievement of its mission and legal mandate. Under that standard, within the user guide, we have the actual guidelines that were given, but for the purposes of the user guide, we have the column for focus points or guiding questions, and some of these questions are: what do your governance and management structures look like? Are they aligned with national and regulatory standards? And then we have given in the last column for that particular standard, the examples of good practice, or what we can say evidence. And one of them is reference to the organizational chart. And of course, let me go there. Reference to the organizational chart of your institution, and also reference to the statutes of the institution. And then other governing guiding questions. Next slide, Anna. Other focal points or guiding questions attributed to this particular standard are: do the relevant bodies have clearly defined mandates, functions, and responsibilities? If so, describe the functions and responsibilities of the relevant bodies. To what extent are the students involved in these bodies? Please provide information on the qualifications and experience of your institution's management. Also provide information on their age and gender, and how inclusiveness and internationalization are taken into account in the recruitment process. And then of examples of good practice would be documented and communicated authorities and responsibilities such as job descriptions, employment contracts, etc., job profile for the top management position, selection processes for the top management positions. I would want us now to go to the next slide. Move on to the next slide so that I can show the other standard. Anna. Let's move on to, standard 7. So we have standard 7, which is on design, approval, monitoring, and evaluation of study programs. And in the standard for this, in the African Standards and Guidelines reads as follows: the institution shall have policies and systems that ensure the design and development, monitoring and evaluation of quality, relevant study programs that are learning outcome based, are aligned with the needs of stakeholders, and that contribute to the achievement of its mission and are commensurate with national, regional, and international standards. In the case of ODL, the provider shall have in place mechanisms for pre-testing or piloting the learning materials to ensure that they are at the learner's level and that the learners will be able to use them without difficulty. Next slide. So in the guiding questions then, we are asking, does the institution have clear standards for curriculum, module, or course design and development? Who initiates the introduction of new programs? What procedures are in place and are they clearly documented and followed? Who is involved in the design, approval, and implementation of the quality assurance procedures, and what does that entail? Why and when does the institution decide to launch a new program? Next slide. And of course, we have many other questions, but now I want to move on to examples of good practice and evidence as per that particular standard. Then we would say policies and procedures on the transfer of students and recognition of courses are available. Ongoing improvement of learning and teaching methods, integrated relationships between teaching staff and staff working at the library with databases, the role of councils and their responsibility for implementing and following up teaching and learning processes. And I think there were others in the earlier slides because we had also policies and procedures on introducing, developing, revising, and terminating study programs, and also admission and graduation policies and procedures. And then, of course, the next good examples would be publishing all expected learning outcomes of all study programs, availability of the pedagogical resources required for the study programs, clarity and integration of the curricula of proposed programs, degree of compatibility of programs with the vision, mission, and goals of the institution, student orientation, and academic advice for students. I would want to move on to the next slide, giving us examples for Part B of the African Standards and Guidelines for Quality Assurance. And of course, these are related to the external quality assurance agencies themselves. The first standard I would want to use as an example is Standard 1, which is on objectives of external quality assurance and consideration for internal quality assurance. The standard reads as, external quality assurance shall ensure that the higher education institution has clearly articulated its vision, mission statement, and it shall help the institution ensure the effectiveness of its internal quality assurance mechanisms, providing an additional instrument for assessing institutional quality. The guiding questions would be, how does the agency ensure that the higher education institution has a clearly defined, articulated, and publicly available vision, mission, and objectives? And of course, examples of good practice would be to indicate the criteria the agency succeeds in ensuring that a higher education institution develops or has a vision, mission, and objectives. And of course, some more focal points, next slide, would be how does the agency take into account the quality policy and the procedures developed by the evaluated institution? And of course, examples or evidences would be to explain the place of Asg-Qa in the agency's criteria and standards, and also the higher education institution undergoing external evaluation describes and analyzes its quality assurance mechanisms. These quality assurance mechanisms are aligned with the vision and mission of the institution. I would want to go to the next standard, that is standard number 5, to show an example of this particular section. And the standard is decision and reporting of external quality assurance outcome. The standard reads as follows: reports and decisions made as a result of external quality assurance shall be clear, based on published standards, processes, and procedures, and made accessible for purposes of accountability. The focal point would be, how does the agency ensure that its standard processes, procedures, and decisions are clear and known? The example of good practice would be, make public documents relating to standards, processes, and procedures known, make the agency's reports and decisions public and accessible. The other focal point would be, how does the agency ensure that it has the means to produce documented and coherent reports to enable objective and fair decision-making? The examples of good practice would be, conduct a critical analysis of published reports and also demonstrate the existence and the proven functioning of right of reply mechanisms. I would want to move on to the next standard, which is standard 4, independence of quality assurance agencies. And of course, the standard reads that the quality assurance agency shall be independent and autonomous in its operations, outcomes, judgments, and decisions. The focal points would be, comment on the independence of your agency in terms of the aspects described in the guidelines: organizational independence, operational independence, and independence of formal outcomes. 2, consider in greater detail how operational and organizational independence is safeguarded in practice. And 3, how does the agency operate independently de facto, especially in terms of defining procedures and methods, as well as nomination and appointment of experts. And 4thly, how does the agency ensure that the outcomes of its quality assurance processes are independently its responsibility? And then, of course, the next slide gives us the examples of good practices. 1 would be policy documents on independence, procedures for nomination of staff, procedures for the development and validation of quality assurance standards, procedures for the approval of expert proposals, appeals, and complaints. I would want to move on to standard 5. For the one of independence on number 4, it was for party C, sorry. And of course, that is for the external quality assurance agencies for purposes of their own internal quality assurance procedures. And of course, the last one is standard 5, policies, processes, and activities. The actual standard is, quality assurance agencies shall undertake its quality assurance activities in accordance with the standards and guidelines articulated in Part B. The focus points are, describe the standards of your QAA, which it applies when carrying out institutional audits, accreditation, and program accreditation / reviews. Were higher education institutions in your country involved in the design of these standards? And then, of course, examples of these are agency standards manuals or booklets, participatory reports of stakeholder meetings in the design of the standards. And then the last slide on this, the focus points would be describe and comment on the steps of your agency that it takes when carrying out institutional evaluation or accreditation and program accreditation or reviews. And of course, good examples would be manual for carrying out institutional and program evaluation or accreditation, database of peer reviewers, peer reviewer manual with standard operating procedures. Next slide. And the target group, scope, and applicability of the user's guide are quality assurance practitioners in the higher education institutions, and of course, quality assurance agencies. And of course, this user's guide is not intended to set out any additional standards or requirements on top of what was already published in the African Standards Guidelines for Quality Assurance for Higher Education, but it actually supports and enhances the implementation of the already existing regional, national, and institutional regulatory standards. And so the examples given in this guide are just illustrative. They are non-prescriptive and non-exhaustive. Next slide. We want to acknowledge the task force members, and of course they are written there: Amin Alal, Abdullahat Sise, Elizabeth Kolushi, Kati Dukas, I might not pronounce the names very well, Anna Guva, Jeffrey Mukora, Apio Kwiri. Next slide. Noel Saliu, Juma Shabani, Annelie Wilson. And of course, the coordinating organizations, we appreciate the way they coordinated the whole task force and enabled us to come up with a document. Obril Global, ENQA, AAU, DAD, and we are also grateful to the project sponsors and overseers, the African Union Commission and the European Union Commission. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Lenga, for your presentation. You took us through how through the user's guide, and I would like to remind participants, if they have questions to specific presenters, they can go into the Q&A and ask questions directly to the speakers. Now we are going to go to the next presentation on the reflections on the use of the Asg-Qa by quality assurance agencies. This presentation will be made by Professor Amin Arad from Algeria. Professor, the floor is yours.
Bonjour à toutes. Bonjour à tous.
Hello, everyone. Good. I hope you had a good start of 2023. When I saw the program and I saw that I was coming after Elizabeth and after Florence, I said, I have nothing else to say after this, because Elizabeth has really summarized very well the process, and Florence focused on the details. So, in order to avoid repeating this, I decided to focus on another pillar. This is why my presentation is called Reflections on the Use of the Asg-Qa for Quality Assurance Agencies and Higher Education Institutions. Very well. Let me start by simply give me 1 second. I'm not sure why my slides aren't moving forward. Okay, I'm going to start with a quote. W. Edwards Deming, this is a person that has strongly influenced everything that has to do with quality assurance. And he said, when he was developing professionally, he says, improving is not enough, as many university people want to do because it's in their culture, but it's also necessary to know what to do and then do your best. The importance of ASG-Qa, I think, has to do with this, but also has to do with this user's guide that we are presenting today. So let me start, first of all, with a first guiding question, and to know a little bit what this is all about. Everybody knows that we have these set of standards where we have a group of standards and guidelines for internal and external quality assurance within higher education. And we started developing this process in 2018. This is not a prescriptive document, but rather a document that serves as something that encompasses the process for quality assurance in higher education institutions and quality assurance agencies in Africa. They have been developed to add value in these institutions, but also to provide a unified framework using the quality logic. This means implementing an approach that focuses on improving and increasing the quality of establishments, of course, at the service of society, which, of course, a higher education institution serves. So the question is, why? Why have we implemented this set of standards? The idea of having this is to have a common framework for Africa in order to fully understand the systems of quality assurance, but also to facilitate exchange and mobility. Quality assurance allows us to develop mutual trust and also facilitates the recognition of the mobility of human resources, both the faculty and the students. Yes, everybody who is involved in the process. It also allows us to implement, in the case of this system, to implement internal and external evaluations, which are essential for ongoing improvement of the quality. A harmonized system is another advantage and one of the main objectives of the process itself, because it has allowed us to reach results which are implemented in the field and has allowed us to measure its efficiency and effectiveness. This set of standards will also ensure quality and support all of the stakeholders and the public in general. Actually, when we talk about quality, in addition to the requirements, because I always say this to my partners when I work with them, the essential thing is not so much to fulfill the requirements, but it is also to adopt the concepts, to assimilate the concepts, because this is what will really create this ongoing improvement of the practices. It also allows the institutions that apply them to promote competitiveness and all of this within the context of Africa, and also to support scientific production, the education processes and evaluation instruments. However, in the field, we can do a lot of things on paper, but in reality, sometimes things are a bit different. Why? Because sometimes there are gaps that are identified. We have a document that tells us what we should do. Then we have the system, which is what we already do. And then the reality, yes, where we find all the gaps, the disparities, and this is the system that we have implemented sometimes is what we expected to do, but then the reality is what we actually do. And here we find some gaps. The ideal is like this triangle that we see here in the middle, which is effectiveness with respect to the objectives that we defined and following the requirements as well, both legal, regulatory, but also of these standards. The ASG-Qa tells us what to do, but they don't tell us how to do it. This is the most important part of my presentation. because we have information, and this is information that, of course, is not exhaustive. We already said this, and each agency is in a different context, of course, and it can have, of course, a different impact on the practices and in practice. This is why, in the case of this project, the user's guide is here to help us implement the Asg-Qa. This guide implements and helps us with the practical aspects of how to do this. It's a little bit like a recipe that we use in the kitchen. So after this set of guidelines, and this Florence presented very well, we have had discussions with the task force that really took a long time, trying to enrich this with examples in order to reach a quality level for these institutions. Finally, these guidelines and this user's guide provide more detail by giving examples, by giving evidence and examples of good practices. But like I said, each establishment, each institution is responsible for the implementation, and practices can change, of course. And this is both for big institutions, small institutions, private, public. So this is, of course, part of the process of each institution. So a first answer to this question, why the guidelines clarify and improve the understanding and interpretation of the Asg-Qa, especially with respect to aspects that may have proved difficult during the first years of their use. It is also focused on facilitating the implementation of the requirements. Yes, like I said before, it clarifies and improves understanding, and as a result, it would facilitate the implementation of these requirements for institutions and for agencies. And I insist on this point because it's not necessarily for the evaluation itself, it's for the implementation of good practices, which will be evaluated either internally or externally by agencies. And the third point, like I said before, is to provide examples of the way in which the agencies can prove that they are aligned with the Asg-Qa. For higher education institutions, you probably all know this, that this is like a logic that has been formalized, and there has been a long history in the implementation. And we call this the 4 stages. Yes, plan, do, check, and act. And I've tried to apply this to an institution with all the elements that have to do with the standards. So first of all, we establish the objectives within the framework of what we're doing, because of course we have institutions that don't do research, for example, and then have take into account the context of the institution and of the stakeholders, collect information, and afterwards plan activities in order to implement these standards, so the requirements for an HEI. Of course, we cannot identify the needs each time. Yes, we have to have this type of plan. The next stage is to implement the requirements. Like I said, we're not going to wait for an internal evaluation. It suffices to take the document, the Asg-Qa, use the guide, and then we are ready to start implementing systems. This allows us to move forward. So the guide is useful to implement the documents and activities that allow us to comply with the requirements. And this guide will also allow you to move quite quickly. And I added one more point, which is risk management. And I'm going to give more details. And for higher education institution, there's also the aspect of self-assessments. So how we do this with the adequate methodology that you probably all know, and in an attempt to meet all of the methodologies of Part A. And then once we identify the gaps, we act. Yes, after checking, which is a green part, we act, which is analyze gaps, initiate corrective actions, implement the actions to improve. But corrective actions are linked to the self-assessments. But when I think about improvement, I also think of a self-assessment, but also of innovation, because often we conduct a self-assessment and this produces ideas of improvement opportunities that will emerge. So this is why I separated these 2 points. And finally, of course, conduct a follow-up and evaluate the improvement actions so that we can find ourselves in a logic that always focuses on progress.
Here as well, we use both of them in the knowledge that even if we have part 1 and part 2, knowing that part 1 includes part A and B, and A and B are completely intertwined, the one with the other. It is for this reason that in part B, we are going to use the Asg-Qa for the evaluations of HAIs, and it is totally aligned. This means that the evaluation that is going to be carried out by the external agency as well as the auto-evaluation, this is established based on the responsibility of the leaders of the HEA, and this is conforming to the elements of Part A. So it's going to be the same guide for the evaluation. Part C has to do with internal quality assurance for the agencies in view of external evaluation by reference agencies that may be found at a higher level. So in that case, we are going to use ASG for Part C for auto evaluations, so for self-evaluations, and also to evaluate the quality of their own activities. So this has to do with the implementation of a system that is compliant with the demands that have been set forth in ASG-Qa. And also the guide can be used for self-evaluation. Of course, the idea is to perform an external evaluation, but the goal is to start with internal evaluation. So this is a synthesis then on the points that we wanted to insist on. So let me come back to the point that I consider that is very important: appropriation of ownership of concepts. It's with a cooking recipe, for example, even without the same ingredients, you read a recipe for couscous and you already know how to prepare couscous thanks to this recipe. And couscous can be prepared with different recipes. So we are talking about revisited recipes. So it's necessary to feel ownership for the various concepts. So we always have to base ourselves on the logic of building a culture of quality that is sustainable, that is based on evaluation, and that is based on the PDCA cycle. So with self-evaluation, we have to be careful about not feeling like this little cat that looks at himself in the mirror and feels like a lion. No, we have to be objective. So the evaluation needs to reflect our practices. So we always have to base ourselves on the logic of the Deming wheel as we know it. PDCA, act, plan, check, and do. So in conclusion, once again, these are aspects that I consider to be important in connection with QA in HEIs and at the agencies themselves as well. It is necessary for us to be able to change our practices. We need to be able to accept change. And that is where we find a problem, because people are reluctant to change. So I use use this publicity, this ad by Apple Think Different. So it is necessary to have solid engagement and the involvement of all the players and all the stakeholders. So, well, thank you. And I will be available for whatever questions that you may have, if it is necessary to clarify any of the concepts that I wanted to share. So thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Ramin, with regards to your reflections on the Asg-Qa and their utilization. We are
quote from the Commission for University Education, Kenya. But I would like to remind participants that we have a Q&A function in the control bar. In case you have questions, you can just put your question there and presenters will respond to them. Thank you. Beatrice, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, to stop sharing the other screen.
Professeur Amin?
Oui.
Oh, ça va bon.
C'est bon?
C'est bon maintenant, merci.
Are we okay? Yes.
Thank you. I hope I'm audible. Good afternoon. You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you so much. Good afternoon. My name is Beatrice Odera Kwach from the Commission for University of Education in Kenya. I'm going to show you a practical example of how we use the Asg-Qa in our country, Kenya, in strengthening our quality assurance tools at the Commission for University Education. The Commission for University Education regulates university education in Kenya. Just a brief background, we have over 70 universities and we only regulate universities. There's another agency for TVET, for other tertiary institutions. So how we applied the Asg-Qa, we started applying. I'm also a graduate of Asg-Qa. So from that time, we have been disseminating all the Asg-Qa documents, and I think at the commission, most of my colleagues are aware of these documents. So we started this project, which was funded by Asg-Qa, arose from a response to COVID. Before COVID, the Commission had standards for ODEL. However, the uptake of these standards was very low. The country had not embraced ODEL per se. The learning was face-to-face, physical. So when COVID arose, there was need to really regulate this type of education. So how do we do it? How do universities do it? What was this ODEL? Everybody was doing anything the way they wanted. However, the government we allowed some of it, but we had to now come in and regulate ODEL education in our country. So we engaged peer reviewers. We developed a tool for self-assessment in universities. And this was in early 2020, and sent it out as a pilot to a few universities. And the response we got from this to all universities, but we got a response from just about 35 universities. Then we embarked on now, we had not even developed a tool for evaluating the reports, the response from the universities. So we saw that there was a need to revise this self-assessment questionnaire and also the tool develop a tool that we were supposed to use. So the project, when there was a call from Asg-Qa on funding of projects, we responded, and our project was funded by Asg-Qa, and we really appreciate. So our project was to build institutional capacity in Kenyan higher education institutions and the Commission for Self-Assessment and Accreditation. So we endeavored to promote the Asg-Qa and AQRM tools, and the activities we embarked on were to revise that self-assessment questionnaire. This questionnaire is available on our website, and I've shared it before. but you can access it through our website, Commission for University Education, under Downloads Kenya. And we wanted to align them to the Asg-Qa. So we also developed an evaluation tool for self-assessment report and for institutional centers first to be used by our experts. We also embarked on training directors of ODEL in higher education in Kenya. We invited them and the response was great and they really need more training for this. So in that workshop, we also disseminated the Asg-Qa. So for the Asg-Qa and AQRM, we used it to review our tool. I'll show you in a while. And following the presentation by Elizabeth Colucci and my senior, Professor Lenga, and now Amina has said, we took cognizance of the structure of ASG, so I will not repeat it. So if you want to see our self-assessment questionnaire, it is based on the same structure of the Asg-Qa. So you can see what the principles of self-assessment, background of quality assurance, what Elizabeth was talking about, what Professor Lenga gave you, it's all here. Background information, governance, management. This is now the tool that we used. And when we were now looking at revising these tools to be sent to universities, we had the Asg-Qa document. Somebody was looking at that. There was somebody looking at various regional tools and international tools, comparing them and using our own university standards and guidelines to look at what we are missing. But what I liked about the Asg-Qa, this was ODEL. It had incorporated ODEL aspects in standard 5 and 8 part A of the IQA. Because the IQA, they are the ones who are going to fill this form. We looked at it. We incorporated the terminologies and terms and new definitions which were there. In part B, which is for EQA, we also used how are we going to monitor, who are we going to engage. I remember us saying, what are we missing? Somebody said we are missing community outreach. In ODEL, there's also community because there are institutions which might only be somewhere and have an ODEL centers. So you can see in our structure of the self-assessment questionnaire, we had background information, governance and management, financial resource management, design, monitoring and evaluation of ODEL, teaching and learning, technology, learning, all these parameters are there. However, in our own context, we have revised them, we expanded, we have gone into detail and you can see it on the website. But now, with the coming of the guide of ASG, which has been done now, we'll also need to revise again because the guidelines I've seen have got many aspects which we can use. In quality assurance, I believe in always revising your tool to be in tandem with the current needs. So that is the self-assessment questionnaire. We revised it and it's an ongoing activity in the commission. This is just for institutional. We also have to do for the programs which are purely ODEL. So when you go to the tool which we developed for evaluating now the institution, we developed a tool which had got these parameters. So what is the category? Institutional parameters, governance, finance, the learning management system, support infrastructure, security, academic programs, quality assurance, assessment, student support. So all these indicators were used to evaluate and they were weighted. So as you can see, we've adapted the same structure, but in our own context, we have expanded them. So that is how we use the Asg-Qa. And I'm open to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Beatrice, for sharing with us how the Asg-Qa was applied in your institution in Kenya. Now we've reached time for questions and discussion with the audience. As I said, we have a Q&A function in the control bar. So people who have questions can just put them there and they will be responded by the presenters. If I can go through the questions, some questions are right there. There is a question from Jacqueline Okelo Arari. She's asking, how will a university get minutes of the agents on stakeholder engagement without breaching confidentiality? I think this question can be answered by Professor Lenga. Professor Lenga?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I, in fact, have answered quite a number of the questions on the chat, on the Q&A, sorry. But this particular question, I was wondering how this one came, because the minutes that we are referring to are minutes of either peer reviewer training or peer reviewer criteria for selection. But when it comes to the minutes for the agency or rather for the stakeholders or the agency, there are many types of minutes. And so I was unable to answer this question through the Q&A because it just says, how will a university get minutes of the agency on stakeholder engagement? If it's engagement on peer review criteria, I believe they can be able to get that because they are documented in the quality assurance agencies. If there are minutes on their program accreditation, in fact, the quality assurance agencies normally give those summaries of those minutes for the actual institutions to be able to refine their programs for purposes of review, for purposes of accreditation and the like. So I really don't know what really the question was about and whether I have done justice to it. I believe Beatrice wants to actually answer because I can see her typing a question, an answer, sorry, thank you.
Beatrice, do you want to add something?
Okay, Prof. Yes, I can just add that normally in the quality assurance agency, the institution will get a report on any engagement, stakeholder engagement. And in some institutions, the report is even online on the website as a download. So the minutes are made into a report. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm trying to go through the questions that were not answered. Another question from Jacqueline Arari. She said, as we discuss about harmonization and integration, this is a welcome aspect for quality assurance. However, where all regional bodies involved in the process of, of developing the Asg-Qa, can we take up and use the tool without the approval of our respective higher education regulator? Do we expect a communication from our respective higher education regulators? Beatrice, I think you can respond to this as you come from the regulator. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Juru. As I said, this tool of Asg-Qa was developed and all the quality assurance agencies starting from the region. Like us in East Africa, Inter-University Council of East Africa was part of it. I remember in Hakawan, we were involved. All the quality assurance agencies in East Africa were involved. Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, and Haka2, we were all there. And based from the regional agency, we promoted the implementation of ASG, and I think this was even signed at the African Union, and we committed to it. So it is our duty to promote and accept all the tenets of the Asg-Qa and implement them as we have agreed upon them together. I believe they signed all these documents.
Okay, thank you so much.
And also as part of the agenda, African agenda, let's say, is it 2060?
63.
Yeah, that one, yes, thank you.
Yeah, there's another question from Rosemary Obasi. Does the Asg-Qa specify the indicators of interest across the input, process, and output dimension of quality assurance policy, or it is just a description of what is expected? Professor Lenga, I think you can answer this one.
Thank you, Juru. The ASG-Qa and the user's guide does have aspects of inputs, does have aspect of processes, and of course, as given in the guidelines of the ASG-Qa and also into the focal points that we have discussed in the user's guide and the examples given, we can be able also to be able to see the non-descriptive, but also examples of indicators.
Okay, thank you so much. We have a question from Michael Wangai. He's saying this user
Maybe
guide
I could add this, Juro. I think
Yes.
when people read the ASG, the standard themselves, followed by the guidelines. And out of the guidelines is a way of implementing. And when you go to the standard, like the ones I was referring, the design, planning, monitoring, evaluation of programs, there you will have to consider the inputs, the processes, even as you come with the product of the actual program. That's why I'm answering the way I'm answering. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Professor Amin? Professor Amin, voulez-vous ajouter quelque chose?
Would you like to add anything, Professor Amin?
Vous pouvez activer votre micro, s'il vous plaît.
You can turn on your mic if possible. With regards to the previous question, the person asked whether it is necessary or they are obligated to refer to higher authorities. Well, it depends on the region and the place where you are, and it depends on the autonomy of each institution. I would like to talk about a preliminary experience that we had in Algeria for a number of years. There are institutions, higher education institutions there that belong to the private sector. In October, we decided to accompany a private institution of higher education in the capital in Algiers with regard to demands having to do with quality. And I convinced them. We started to work with these guys on ASG-Qa, well, baby steps there. So we decided to implement it because the institution had sufficient autonomy that allowed them to implement ASG-Qa without the approval of an authority. So it depends on the context and it depends on the legal framework and how much, to what extent the legal framework allows you to implement ASG-Qa.
Yeah, the user's guide is a welcome document, even with available standard and guidelines provided by national quality assurance agencies. Said they find a lot of hesitation in implementing internal quality assurance in higher education institutions by higher education institutions. So what possible strategies could you suggest to persuade, influence, embrace the ASG-Qa in higher education institutions? Maybe this one I can start with Professor Amin, then we'll follow with other presenters. Amin?
Thank you. I will try to provide an answer. Well, it has to do with what I just said. The problem that we see is a problem of reluctance to change. And the problem of the system or the systems themselves are these systems that make institutions autonomous. So that allows us to make the more appropriate decisions. And secondly, we need to fight against reluctance to change. So in this case, I also intervene in the institutions of higher education by other types of organizations. So right now I am a consultant and I am retired. And there is a lot more reluctance to change amongst university people because, as I said, it is sufficient to have, it's necessary to have a communication strategy and awareness raising strategy so as to show to all the actors and the players in the institution that the contributions that this can make. And it is necessary to have a lot of planning going on, a policy of internal communication. And if then afterwards, well, of course, there is not a universal recipe, there is not a one size fits all.
Something as you were initially in the agent side, now you are back to the higher learning institution. Professor Lenga. On
yes.
the possible strategies to you would suggest to persuade or influence higher learning institution to embrace the Asg-Qa.
One of the issues is that the institutions, first of all, must recognize that they need to put mechanisms in place to improve the quality of their higher education in order to be able to produce quality graduates. Once they are able to understand that, and that the market for their graduates is not just localized in their countries, but it's actually internationalized, then there is no option for them but to actually align themselves to the improvement of their quality as per the set standards in their own countries, but either through the Ministry of Education, if they have no quality assurance agencies, and also through the African Commission, which is actually spearheading the harmonization of higher education in Africa. And so if the institutions do not take it up early enough, sooner or later they'll be forced, because people are moving together as a region and even as a continent. I think that's all I can add.
Thank you so much, Professor Lenga. Now I would like to request Sarah to help me with the Portuguese questions.
Yes.
We've got so far 2 questions, yes.
Well, one question was, I think for Beatrice, maybe Beatrice, you can sum up a little bit. One question was, if I translate, I would like to know if the Asg-Qa tool can be used to ensure the quality of e-learning education systems.
Okay, thank you for that question. As I said, the Asg-Qa has incorporated the ODEL aspects in their standards, because they are broad standards, they're not prescriptive. So you find that each aspect of regulating university education or internal quality assurance is embedded in the ASG. If you go into part A, which is on internal quality assurance, you will find that there are incorporated aspects of how this ODEL infrastructure should be. When you are doing the standards on infrastructure, you will find common terminologies so that we have a common understanding, so that in all the institutions, when we say infrastructure for ODEL, this is what we mean. That is what the standard is for minimum. So it has incorporated all that, but in our own context, we can expand it. So it has incorporated that in most of its standards. For ODEL also, it's not only a single item that it's ODEL. What is ODEL? There is ODEL in governance, there is ODEL in, you have to finance, you have to have human resource, you have to monitor it. So in your own aspect as an institution, you have to develop a structure in ODEL for the ODEL system in your university. So in both institution and ODEL program, you also have, whether it is a blended program or it is purely ODEL, you still need the Asg-Qa. And the Asg-Qa helped us because they had embedded aspects of ODEL in infrastructure, in teaching, learning, and assessment. You will see in the ASG, especially for IQA, for the institutions, it's a
Hello, Beatrice.
Oh, I think she lost connection maybe.
Yes. Muted myself. I don't know what happened.
Sorry.
You can hear me now.
Yes.
But I'm saying that the Asg-Qa, if you go to standard 5, part A, it has incorporated aspects of ODEL in infrastructure facilities for e-learning. When you go to standard 8, if I remember, the aspect of teaching, learning, and assessment is there. And for us now in Kenya, we said, no, we need a different aspect of learning. the parameter for assessment is different, so that you broaden it in your context and where you are, because there are structures which are developed in other countries and not. So I like the Asg-Qa because it incorporated what we needed at this time. And for the guidelines, which are more detailed, which you're looking at today, I think they have incorporated more and a guide. So as an institution, you can use them to develop your ODEL and also your e-learning. And also at the Quality Assurance Agency, we can also use them to develop our own minimum standards to evaluate ODEL. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sarah, is there any other question in Portuguese?
Yes, thank you, Beatrice. So you all can see that the Asg-Qa have standards and guidelines for ODL and online learning. So feel free to have a look. And one question was, I want to know what the Asg-Qa means. And this is a very good question because we tend to use all these abbreviations. So Asg-Qa stands for African Standards and Guidelines for Quality Assurance. And one question from Esmeralda, she asked, what is the function, what is the purpose of quality assurance agencies in higher education? So maybe Prof. Amin, you can briefly reflect on that, the role of an QA agency.
So the role of a quality assurance agency is simply to indicate the level you have with respect to the compliance with the requirements of quality. The first step is self-assessment. And remember, in my last slide, I said this. Remember that self-assessments have a lot of subjective aspects because it is us who are conducting that assessment on our institutions. So there are, different aspects involved there. But the agency will have an external view. So it will be much more objective and will indicate during a first stage where we are with respect to how much we comply with the requirements of quality. There could come a day where the programs can be accredited. Yes, an agency can even accredit programs. That means that they recognize the competencies and how well we manage what we do. There is also a lot of power that they can have on the programs that we have, and this accreditation is very important, especially when we are working on a very competitive environment and when people are trying to choose what establishment to study. Sometimes this is not possible because of the massive aspect and the massive nature of certain processes. But these experts, like I said, will allow you to move forward because first of all, they will emphasize your strengths, yes, which points can be improved as well, and also if there are requirements that are not being complied with and how to apply corrective measures. They will also play a role in terms of advising what to do. Thank you.
Sarah, une autre question?
Non, c'est tout.
Okay. Now we are going to the next question from Michael Mawa. He's asking, are there any examples of how the independence of quality assurance agencies is compromised? I think these Professor Lenga can respond.
Thank you, Juru. Yes, there are examples. Let me give one example where a quality assurance agency has undertaken its accreditation process for the purposes of accrediting an institution or accrediting a program in a given country. And then the Minister of Education or stakeholders within the Ministry of Education, actually, when they read the report and they see that the institution is not going to be accredited because of one or two issues that have been highlighted, they can overrule. And if the commission or the quality assurance agency is not does not practice independence and is actually subjected to of government interference, then obviously an institution of that caliber can be accredited. Even the program that is substandard can be accredited because the quality assurance agency has not got the powers to be independent. It does happen in quite a number of countries where institutions that are substandard are accredited, programs that are substandard without the proper teaching staff, equipment can be accredited. It does happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. There's another question from Michael Wangai. He's saying that as a Qa officer in University of Nairobi, Kenya, I'm all ready to implement the Asg-Qa, especially the internal quality assurance. From this training, is there a next step for implementation and follow-up? I think this maybe Elizabeth can respond to it. Elizabeth.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, Drew, could you repeat the question, please?
Someone is asking that he's ready to implement the Asg-Qa, especially the internal quality assurance. Now he's asking, from this training, is there a next step for implementation and follow-up?
Okay, thank you. That's a very important question. The promotion and the implementation of the Asg-Qa will be an ongoing process. I think it's important to mention, and I've also put this in the chat, that this tool is a recognized tool of the Pan-African Quality Assurance and Accreditation Framework. This is a framework that has been politically endorsed by the African Union Council. It's a framework that is comprised of several different tools and actions that will support continental harmonization more generally, not just in quality assurance. Of those tools are the eventual development of an African credit transfer system, the development of a continental qualifications framework for education, which is something that has already been done or is in progress, and other actions, in addition to the African standards and guidelines. So these are all tools that are part of a politically endorsed process and framework. Concretely, what does that mean? The European Union has now committed to funding another phase of the Asg-Qa initiative. The Asg-Qa, this is very relevant because that means that there will be further resources to support the promotion and implementation of the Asg-Qa across the continent. And more concretely, there will be further trainings, training opportunities for higher education institutions and also for quality assurance agencies. So I think, in the immediate, I would say stay tuned. There will be more information coming soon about what exactly that will entail and what exactly the opportunities will be. But just to say that in addition to what the Asg-Qa initiative will continue to fund and support, many of the quality assurance networks in Africa, like the East African Quality Assurance Network or RAFANAC, which is the network of Francophone quality assurance agencies, which is newly established. These networks are starting to take up the African standards and guidelines, starting to use them, starting to promote them. So ideally, beyond the funding that the Asg-Qa initiative provides, there will be more training opportunities and promotion opportunities that will happen in the context of the work of these very important networks in Africa.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your clarification. Then another question is for Professor Amin. From Christopher Foyle is saying, is the role of the quality assurance agencies more about validating the institution rather than accrediting individual courses? Most universities self-accredit, and this is seen as an important element for ensuring their academic freedom. Professor Amin?
Merci. En fait,
Thank you. Agencies actually do not focus on individual processes. They focus on institutional evaluations that include everything. I'm not going to go into details, but they don't go into the details of the program. And also they focus on programmatic evaluations that focus specifically on certain processes. So these programmatic evaluations or assessments are very important. With respect to academic freedom, it is preserved in all of the standards, and it's one of the bases of higher education. So it has no impact on the work of the agencies.
Merci beaucoup. We have another question of Viswanathan Patel. He's asking, to what extent is the quality management system like ISO 9001-2015 helpful in assisting in the implementation of the Asg-Qa standards and guidelines? This one question maybe Professor Lenga or Dr. Beatrice can respond to this.
Let me try. ISO standards, whichever standards they are many, are mainly for processes and procedures of institutions or organizations. And they are for quality of procedures, implementation of procedures, and the like. Whereas the standards and guidelines that are actually given for quality assurance are actually for purposes of institutional and the program quality enhancement or quality improvement. So there are two issues here. We have quality improvement for programs and institutions per se, and also we have the ISO standards, which now are actually the processes, procedures, all those that are implemented in the governance and management of an institution for purposes of now what they call performance rating of the given institution. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Now, Professor Amin would like to add something. Yes, Prof.
Oui, je pratique les deux. Donc
yes, I would like to add something. With ISO, there is a generic standard that can be applied because it actually integrates all types of processes. Yes, it can even be research or education or even services to society. There's one that is generic, and there are many establishments that have the ISO certification. And of course, it has to do with also customer satisfaction. But there is a specific ISO standard, is ISO 21000, specific for education establishments, and which is particularly recommended for higher education institutions. So things as they are today, and I was discussing things with a Tunisian colleague, today it is not very widely used. I think it is in the process of maturing. And but it is specific for higher education, but it's incipient. I think it will arrive because it is a standard that has a certain level. And the question is, will it converge or not with the standards of the European Union and other international standards? The future will tell. But I am convinced that there's always good things when there are standards. It's always good, even if teachers reject sometimes these things because they think that ISO produces Coca-Cola. It is a manufacturer of products, but it's not like that. It is just a matter of understanding how they are implemented and what their goal is. But I took a look at ISO 21000, and that is my opinion. Thank you.
Professor Amin, we are almost arriving at the end of our webinar. I would like to quickly recap what we went through since morning. So we started with the introduction background of the user's guide. And there was also an introduction on the user's guide where examples of some sections were presented. And we saw that for each standard, there were some points to focus on or guiding questions. And also for each standard, you have some examples of good practices and evidence. And the user's guide also provides for target group scope and applicability of this users guide. We've also got a presentation on the reflection on the use of the Asg-Qa by the quality assurance agencies. This one was made by Professor Amin Alad, where he tried to explain why this users guide is, why the Asg-Qa are important, why institutions should embrace them, and also he stressed that institutions should accept and embrace the change if they want to be good in quality assurance. After that, we also got a presentation of Asg-Qa dissemination project. This one was implemented at the Commission for University Education in Kenya. And here also Dr. Beatrice shared how the Asg-Qa were applied in her institutions. And after this, we've got some interaction where people are asking questions and the discussion, and you realize that people really are eager to understand more about this Asg-Qa and also the user's guide. And in the questions, some people were asking about the Asg-Qa project. Those questions were not tackled here, but I would like to request those people who had more questions related to the Asg-Qa project to visit the website where they will get more information. The website will be put in the chat so they can get more information through the website. But also if they need to have more information related to the Asg-Qa tool or this user's guide, they may send questions either to Obrel or to DAD, and they'll be receiving more information related to the user guide or the Asg-Qa. So for more information on all these Asg-Qa or the user's guide, you can visit the Asg-Qa website. The link is posted in the chat. Also, to stay informed on the new development, please subscribe to the database. The link was also provided in the chat. So we've got a lot done today. So thank you so much for your time and your active participation. Let's continue to be good ambassadors of the African standard and guidelines for quality assurance and the Asg-Qa users guide at our respective institutions. Have a great day, everyone, and bye.
Au revoir.
Bye.
Au revoir, bye.
Bonne journée et encore une fois, excellente année.
Bye.
Thank you.